Lovely, right, we're back. I've been terrible. I apologise, everyone. It's been a long-lasted couple of weeks. We are now on episode 8 of the People of Interest podcast. And today I have, I was going to say a fellow athlete, but you're still an athlete, but not a track and field athlete anymore.
Retired track and field
Yeah,
athlete.
indeed. I'm joined by Sophie Keeble, who I've had the pleasure of growing up with and running alongside during our childhood days with track and field and athletics.
Yeah.
And the reason I've got this lady in today is because she has done a big move over to sports, to a different sport even. She's now powerlifting, which I thought would be a really nice conversation to have in terms of the why, the what, the where, the how and who. And also what I would say is that you have actually been seeing your journey over the last couple of years has been a massive motivator to starting this. So thank you very much and well done for all your journey so far. Yeah, amazing. So where do we begin today? I obviously know you. Everyone else listening probably doesn't. Mm-hmm. So, who are you?
I'm Sophie. Bikini athlete, powerlifter, got into the bodybuilding world 5 years ago. Powerlifting from last year, online fitness coach now, doing that full time. That's probably the main things. That's the biggest rundown, Amazing.
Perfect. Okay, right. So I know, obviously, when we messaged the other night anyway, just to get you put up on the story and just see if anyone comes through with any questions. Yeah. I obviously have some questions myself. By the way, I was going to message you about that because I was like, oh my god, is she panicking, thinking I'm just not prepared for this episode whatsoever?
It's fine.
I have done. Don't worry. I just wanted to see if everyone else would get involved as well. So before I get into those questions today, I guess I wanted to ask, just from our time growing up with athletics and things like that, what kind of promoted the change for you to maybe leave track but also pick something like weightlifting as well and powerlifting, because they're so kind of different?
I feel like it was an accumulation of things, because athletics I did from the age of 11 till about 20, but I would say I only really had good seasons up until I was about 15, 16, and that's when I got injuries. I had torn hamstring, stress fractures in the foot, that's when it started to go downhill. And I was determined to get back to it, fully fit, competitive. I tried to move away from the 1s and 2s to the 400. Had a couple of races, started uni. I would say that happened. Met boys, that happened. And I never really got back to where I was. I never really got back to how competitive I was. And then it started to feel like more of a stress than anything else, because I wasn't enjoying it as much from just always doing rehab and always trying to get back into it. And I think that was the driving force, because every time I got an injury, my physio was like, right, we need to get you in the gym then. Like, you're weak. Like, that's why you're getting injured. Taught me how to lift weights. My physio was kind of a strength and conditioning coach as well. My brother was doing his degree in sports science at the time, so I always had someone kind of able to teach me. And so the majority of my athletics days towards the end was just in the gym anyway. I wasn't really able to run. So when I went to uni, I transitioned to the athletics club at uni and still was in the gym. I had a friend at uni, Jake Burney, shout out to Jake Burney, who was an athlete as well. He competed in bodybuilding in my first year of uni in men's physique, and he was like, you need to do bikini. He was like, you'd be perfect for it. And I was like, what is bikini? Like, no clue what it was. I was like, absolutely not. Like, I have no idea. Started to follow a few of the girls that did the same show as him. And then 2 years later, I stepped on stage for the first time. And I was just weightlifting my whole way there, basically. It got me into more of the gym sports, I guess you could say. It was kind of, that was the progression anyway. It was almost kind of a nice progression from athletics, because that was a lot of my training, and then someone in athletics literally was like, you should do it. That's how it came about.
Okay. I had the question, obviously, I told you about before we started this, because it just made me laugh so much. Again, like, everyone that sent me questions through, thank you for that. But obviously, these are all anonymous, so I don't know who put this. So whoever put this, next time, we can just have a bit of context, you sausage, because I just don't. So the question was, not going to judge, but why? So what I'm thinking that question might have meant, in terms of, and something I did want to get into with you today, I just wonder if it come from a perspective of what bodybuilding and powerlifting is, and then being a female in that, if that makes sense.
I guess the perspective of it from people that don't know much about it, I would assume, probably is the angle they're asking.
Yeah,
not wanting to judge.
Yeah,
but
and it's just because again, I guess for myself, and again, I hope this doesn't come across as creepy,
No.
but your physique is not, I guess, what maybe that question's fueled by, thinking you're turning into this absolute just She-Hulk of a woman, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but I think as I've seen you progress throughout the years anyway, is that, again, I think the word conditioning is like a great one to reflect on, maybe where you compete, not in terms of just getting absolutely solid.
Yeah, I would say so. I guess if someone, I think sometimes bodybuilding in itself gets a bit of a bad name. That's probably where it's coming from. I think it's because it's this idea of you're going to get really, really lean, and obviously the diet's very extreme, and it's, you know, we never try and convince people it's healthy, because it isn't. But a lot of people then just think, well, if it's not healthy, why do it? My argument to that is always, every elite sport isn't healthy. Like, you can't possibly be the best in the world at any sport and be, you know, quote unquote healthy. It's why most sportsmen and women retire in their 30s. They can't keep going. I honestly, bodybuilding, the reason why, even though it is a bit unhealthy, it kind of replaced the athletics a little bit for me. I think that transition affected me mentally a lot more than I thought it would, and a lot more than I was willing to admit when I was younger. Because
when you say transition, at what point is that? Is that leaving track?
Yeah, because it was my whole life throughout my teens. Like, I would miss parties. I would, like, do you know what I mean? I'm sure you would.
No, 100%. Yeah.
It
Fridays,
was my whole life.
Text after school, be like, you coming to the park? No, bro.
I'm competing at the track. I'm competing tomorrow. I've got to go home early. Which was great, because I think it instilled so much discipline from a young age, which I think was perfect. But when I finished it, I definitely felt like I was a bit lost. Because it was my whole life. I thought, I'm going to go to the Olympics. Like, I have to. It's my only route in life. It's all I want to do. And then when you walk away from that, you think, there's a bit of like, oh, did I give up too soon? Could I have tried a bit longer? But where I walked away from it, and I didn't really... All I had then was my degree to work at, and I know to a lot of people that's a great motivator, but I was a bit like,
it's just not it.
It's not really it. It's not adrenaline enough. It's not.
I was literally going to say, the worst thing is because of the action of doing the degree is usually just sat down, just writing. I was like, even when I was at uni, I was just like, I've got so much time to fill my time with, because I think I went into a lot of the uni work like the same way with athletics. I turn up, I'm going to smash it, and then I'll go home, recover, repeat. So everything was done like ahead of time. Like, all of my papers and all that was handed in like maybe a month before, as soon as like, you know, turned on, and I was like, right, I've got literally like... And I've always been fueled by something bigger than that, like just a bigger goal, something bigger. So when I got into the bodybuilding, it almost filled that void that I didn't have from athletics anymore, and it definitely gave me back that spark of like, okay, I'm actually like, I have something to focus on, I have a goal now. So I would say that was the reason why it started. It really filled that void, and I just really loved the whole process about it straight away, I think. I like that concept you spoke about of like it not being healthy, because I've never looked at sport like that. And then, as you said that, looking back at again how obsessive we probably were, like, you know,
it's
like
funny as well, because
indoors,
people see you get really lean for stage, and they think, God, like, you're obviously, we don't stay that lean forever. It's for pretty much a week or two, you know. But your hormones do downregulate and all of that. But I do look at it and I think, I used to train more when I was in athletics. We would throw up in the bushes and get straight 100%, back on the track. If I did that in the gym, then I've got to work out how many calories I've lost to try and replace to keep it consistent. You wouldn't get to that point with the bodybuilding. And I often think about that. I'm like, the training's nowhere near as hard as it was back in the day. And some days I would do 2 sessions a day all year round, not even just to prepare for a show, you know. So,
What's the competition atmosphere like in the bodybuilding? Because again, going back to just that unhealthiness, because I spoke to Dwayne about this as well, actually, when I did the interview with him. That upstairs warm-up area in Lee Valley is just fueled with testosterone.
Oh my God.
Like, I'll go up there and headphones on and everyone's just staring each other out, and it's just like something's going to break out any minute. Is that a similar culture in, like, during competition days?
I would say with the men, yes. The men very much so. Obviously the drug use is massive anyway, and they're all, you know. I would say with the men, they do take, I mean, everyone takes it seriously, but I would say the men do take it a lot more seriously, because they do have to build, like, obviously the female physiques are impressive, but the how hard the men have to to push is beyond what the women have to do. So they are a lot more in the zone. They are a lot more focused. When it comes to the women, it's more supportive. It's more female empowerment vibes. Everybody wants to see each other do well. Everyone's excited for everyone. And I think that's really nice, because I think when you see a bunch of women being compared on how they look, ultimately, you think, oh, it must be really bitchy. It's really not. It's the total opposite. And I think because it's quite a niche sport, so there isn't always going to be someone at your gym that does it as well. There might not be many people locally to you. So you meet people through Instagram, and then that's the day you might meet and spend time together. So it's a lot more fun, I would say. But the men, it can be very, very serious. And I also think with the bodybuilding as well, it's kind of, the work is done before you step on stage. You're not performing as such like you would in 100 meters or the powerlifting. So if you weren't focused for the 16 weeks beforehand, there's nothing you can do on the day. Whereas with the powerlifting, sometimes there's that atmosphere of headphones on, no one's looking at each other. It's very, very serious because they have to perform in the moment. So there's two very different atmospheres that I'm involved in now, but I quite like the powerlifting one.
Okay, so
I quite like the seriousness.
Let's have a chat about them, because I think the powerlifting then, would that be kind of like what it was at Commonwealth, so like snatch, clean, jerk, all that stuff?
No, that's the squat, bench, deadlift. So that would be the Olympic weightlifting. Powerlifting, squat, bench, dead, But
are you still competing like you would do in terms of going to the weight, lift it, get the marks, and then off you go? Okay. So just out of interest then, before we get into that, because I think that powerlifting side of stuff reflects a lot like athletics would, in terms of I turn up, I've either run a time or I've lifted a weight, and then if I haven't run a time, I know why I need to do X, Y, and Z.
It's more objective.
This is something I did want to ask you actually. The bikini side of stuff is, how did you find that transition of potentially performing in something where actually is it objective, or can they do anything to be objective? Because surely it's down to the judges on the day of what they're looking for and what they like.
There is a criteria, but if you all meet the criteria, then they have to just choose. They have, and it can come down to when one of my shows this year, I was really making eye contact with the judges and making sure I was smiling at them, and one of them whispered, "She's really looking at us. Like we like that." And it's like, that isn't something you can train for. It's nothing to do with your physique, exactly. But that gave me like a mark above other people. So I would say, in terms of the transition between, because like I mentioned with like the drug use in bodybuilding, there are women I competed against that use drugs, and I beat them naturally. So it's kind of like they technically, I guess, worked harder in some ways. They did more, but their efforts weren't necessarily correlating with their position. And I think that is quite difficult, because sometimes you can psych yourself out in training and think, sometimes that doesn't mean anything anyway. Someone can just rock up and take the win, and it doesn't matter if I've worked hard or not. That can 100%. Whereas the powerlifting, you know what your competition can lift, and you know what you can lift. So you either do it or you don't. So very different.
How do you taper for the such differences as well? Because again, like as you mentioned, like the bikini side of stuff is so like lean, make sure everything's like tip top, tracking like everything day to day, and then maybe preparing for like power. Do you choose at the beginning, or say the beginning of a year, as we would like for a season? Do you choose which one you're going to do, or would you fluctuate between both for a year, if that makes sense?
For a whole year, I'd commit to one. Because once you're getting leaner for the bikini, you lose strength. So there's no point, and your recovery would be really, really off. And the training is very different. I didn't squat, bench and deadlift for about 6 months before my bikini shows, because of the recovery. They're so taxing on your central nervous system that everything's a bit more, just like lateral raises and hip thrusts instead. If you was getting lean, you wouldn't be able to compete in powerlifting. They're very different training, very different amounts of food. So that's why last year I did the powerlifting, this year I did the bikini, next year I'll go back to the powerlifting.
Okay. Cool. So another one of the questions that I had, and I had to Google this, so sort of what it meant, and then I was like, okay, no, that does make sense. So it simply states natty or not. So do you want to explain to people what that means?
So that would be whether or not I've taken steroids.
And I was quite interested in, we've talked about prior to the mics recording, so we'll probably have to touch on it as well. But I know we compared things in terms when it's track and field, if you're caught, finished. Like it's like big
Life
taboo.
Over.
Jog on, get out of my face. But again, maybe that's just reflecting on that. It seems to be, is accepted the right word or not? Or is it just...
Yeah, normalised, I guess, probably is which is controversial in itself. Because some people don't think it should be normalised, but then would you rather it normalised and the education is on it? It's one of those, it's a bit controversial, I would say.
Okay.
But normalised is probably the right word.
How in terms of how does the federation things, because we spoke about it before we started recording, how does it work in terms of yes I am or no I'm not?
Yeah, so there are natural federations, which they say they're tested federations and then untested federations. So the idea would be if you compete untested, then you have free reign to take whatever you want and no one's going to stop you, no one's going to test you for anything. And then obviously the tested federations, they don't test everyone, which is the difficulty, because some people are always going to fall through the loop. They might test you if you break a big record, or they might do it random, but you are open to be tested at competition, basically. Yeah, so there's different federations, and some federations have two separate. So the powerlifting federation I compete in, they have the BPU and the ABPU. BPU, you can use whatever you want. ABPU, you're considered to be natural.
Okay. Is it kind of difficult working, I guess, being around that? I'm not saying that you are, but like, I guess in some way, shape or form, you've experienced being around, if it's just an individual, how is that? Because again, coming from, I was gonna say athletics is a clean sport. There is what hypocritical comment, but very assumed to be, and it's again, people would actively work to hide it. So, have you noticed, or is there does it impact you at all, just being around something that's a bit more free flowing? Or
not really. I think when I first started, I was very naive, and I would assume everyone was natural until told otherwise, to be honest with you. Even if they had an incredible physique or super strong, I would just think, unless they tell me, you'd assume that they were. But now you get very good at noticing in the physique what someone would look like if they have taken stuff. And it's very common conversation, and it's very normal. And I think the only effect it has on me is that I don't necessarily feel like I can always partake in conversation, because there's so many different types of drugs, and I'm learning about them all through conversation, even though I've never taken them. So I wouldn't even know where to start in a conversation. Other people talk about them like it's an obvious terminology. And I'm just and I'd say to my boyfriend, because he knows a lot more about them, so what does that one do? What does that what are they even for? People take a cocktail of them, do you know what I mean? And it does, sometimes it's a bit almost intimidating, maybe, that people have a whole other thing. I track my macros and I track my training. They've got a whole other thing to keep track of. I would say it's a little bit intimidating, but I would say for the women my age and in my weight class, we're not complete. I'd say bodybuilding is probably 50-50. When you see me on stage and the other girls on stage, probably 50-50 who's taken and who hasn't. In the powerlifting, it's a bit more obvious because the women are clearly a lot bigger and stronger. But I wouldn't be in the same category, so I wouldn't be submerged with them as much. If that makes sense.
So you would get, that was going to be my next question in terms of why. It's a bit more
separate, a little bit.
Because I was going to ask there, what is it that keeps you bothering then, if that makes it, or why do you bother? And it's definitely also a crossroads as well that I know I'm going to come to soon with the bodybuilding. If when you look at the best in the world, they're all using, it's all obvious. And so if you do want to be a professional and you do want to end up in, the top 10 in the world, it's very unlikely you're going to do it naturally. And so a lot of people in the bodybuilding and powerlifting world, they get to a certain point where they're good and the potential's there, and they have to make that decision. Do they want to keep going just for fun and knowing that they're not going to win anymore, or are they going to start using themselves? And a lot of people end up at that crossroads and they have to make a decision, unfortunately, which I guess in the athletics days, it was either I don't know, I think it was more perceived that you were either the type of person that was going to or you weren't. Yeah. Whereas there's this idea in bodybuilding and powerlifting that you'd probably start off natural and you'd face a crossroads at some point, Is that just for yourself then, is that crossroads something that you're starting to come up to consider, or you would at all, or do you think that where you're comfortable with doing this now?
I know I'll never use anything. I know I'm completely comfortable with it, but I do know that I'm getting to the point where I have to decide how much more serious would I want to take the bodybuilding. Powerlifting, I feel like I've still got a long way to go to improve on. Bodybuilding, I feel like I'm starting to get to the natural limit. for me, is it worth it to keep going without much real improvement? Maybe not. I guess that's something I'll decide over the next couple of years. I think that's the difficult one. Can I see myself putting myself through the prep, knowing I'm not going to get that much more improvement? Yeah. It's a difficult one. Yeah, it's a difficult one. So I really love it.
Yeah, so I guess, again, like for myself, like obviously I've gone back to track now for a bit, but I only do open meets really now. I wouldn't even bother jumping into like club competition that much really. Yeah. So, but again, I feel like, again, the way it's all set up with that is that I feel quite comfortable doing that, because again, with athletics is like that social side of stuff as well. But interesting to hear from yourself that you know that there is almost just a glass ceiling if with your kind of motivations to stay natural. But then what is it about bikini work then that is different to track and field, where you wouldn't want? Is it just for the fact you don't want to put yourself through what comes with having to prep for it and stay in natural? Would that lose if that makes sense?
I think the preps are so hard, and you do a couple of shows a year, but you start, like I would say this year's shows that I started prepping for them a year in advance, because you have to spend time building some more muscle, increasing your calories, getting your metabolism to a good point, and then I did like a 4-month cut. So it's a big chunk of time. It's a big chunk of time to just be focused on that one sole goal and not really stray away from it. And I think, you know, again, being a subjective sport as well, you could put all of that into it and someone just goes, still not kind of good enough, you know, which is a difficult one. And I think for me, there's definitely levels to it. So in bodybuilding, so I've only competed in regional shows. If you do that, you can qualify for a British Champs, which is a pro qualifier. So pro qualifiers, you can earn your pro card, and then you compete in the competitive pro league internationally, biggest shows in the world. If I was really, really close to turning pro, then I would probably really go for it. Even naturally, I'd really, really go for it. Just to say I did it, get the pro status, maybe compete internationally a little bit, but also know I was never really going to be top 10 in the world. I'm not yet sure how close I would be to pro status. I think if I did get it, it would be because other people didn't turn up. I feel like there's still a little bit of a way to go, a little bit. If I keep working at it for a few years, I might get it. Again, a few years is another big chunk of time. And I think for me, as much as I'm still quite young, I know that once I hit my 30s, I'll be thinking more children and stuff like that. And when you put yourself through a bodybuilding prep, and it is hard on the hormones, it is hard on your body, you don't know if there's ever going to be any long-term effects of that. You don't know if that's ever going to affect fertility or anything like that, even without drug use. And so I've always been a little bit more conservative to just push myself really, really hard, just in case, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Could I ask maybe like a stupid question then, because it's more, as you mentioned there, the physiology of it. Just being physically active and sport and everything else is, I guess, at a real kind of lower kind of mere mortal, and I don't mean to be rude to people that listen to this that don't do sport or haven't engaged in it, but obviously it's seen as a good thing. As you've hit on the head really nicely today, is that in anything that you do and commit to, particularly as we've experienced with track and field, is that it's not healthy, because you probably miss out on that social element and things like that. What is it then with the bikini work particularly and the bodybuilding stuff, because as you mentioned, there is that physiological deficit there that is like, but I'm going to do it anyway. Do you know what I mean? Because it comes with risk that could long term, in terms of like, as you tapped on there, with just potentially having children, things like that. What you're doing now could impact that for the future. So what is it, or what are the things that are like, but I'm going to do it anyway?
I think for me, it's the understanding that I do have some potential to do well. Because when I first, like I said, I first started because Jake was like, you should do it. And I was like, oh, you think I'd be good at it? Like, he's not going to say that if he thinks you're going to come last, you know what I mean? And my first competition, I came second. And I coached myself through it. I did a really short prep, and I beat loads of other girls that were paying for coaches and had done it before. So I was like, oh, there might be something in this. Like, I might, and I've never had a coach, which is completely unheard of in bodybuilding, really. Everyone says, get a coach. And I've never done it with a coach. So to get to a point where I've won shows and judges have said you have great potential, there's always something that's like, oh, I could do it, know? And I think that's why I've done it the last few years. In terms of the adverse health effects, it gets harder every time. the health effects get more obvious every time. So now I'm 5 years in, that is knocking on the door a little bit more, like how, like if you know it's got worse every year, what was it going to be like next year? Do you know what I mean? And how far are you willing to go? And it is a difficult rabbit hole that you can find yourself falling down. I like to think that I have people around me that would tell me otherwise.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that where I've had to coach myself, I haven't had to, but where I have done, I've had to really dive into all of the information. I've done so many hours of studying on it for myself that I feel like I do have a real understanding. I'm not going into it blindly. I think some people do, and then they're like, oh my god, this like ruined me for X, Y and Z reason. It's like, but you should have known that was, you know, potential beforehand. So yeah, I would say, just to answer the question, the potential to know I could do well at it, and also I'm not going to do something blindly. Do you know what I mean? I feel like the more information you have, the better you can make that decision. Yeah.
Does it feel at this point as well, because again, you know, just in terms of how maybe wrong it could go in terms of what you're doing physiologically to yourself, does the fact that you've done so well looking after yourself now, we've just be like, I don't want a coach now? Because I can imagine, I get it from the perspective of find a coach, people saying that, but you doing your own due diligence, which I think is actually quite good, because I assume some people would just go get a coach and then fuck that off and not bother themselves.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Because they would just follow what they say.
Yeah.
And I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? You can follow what they say and do really well, or you can be completely naive.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I never got a coach, because I now have my own team of bikini girls, and I think they really trust me because they know that I haven't just listened to someone else. I know what I'm doing. I've considered getting, I had a coach for about 2 or 3 months and it didn't work out for me. And so I walked away from that situation. I've seen other people I would potentially look into coaching with, but there's always something, and I'll stalk their Instagrams, I'll stalk their YouTubes, there's always something I don't quite agree with that they seem to value or push. And when it comes to bodybuilding, there's different opinions and there's different ways of doing things, and you've got to be very comfortable with what you're doing. And I've just seen certain things that I'm like, oh, there's just that one little thing that this person's doing that I'm not a fan of. So yeah, I would stay under my own wings for now.
No, that's great. In terms of then, I guess, if we could talk about just being, I know we've touched on it a little bit already, but I would like to go into a bit more detail in terms of just being a woman, like in this kind of sport and things like that, because I wonder, just based on that one question I did get, and I had a few other people message me as well, just asking in terms of, or just replying to me saying how like great you looked and stuff, but it was from friends that I know that maybe they're just not physically active, who are females anyway. So in terms of because touching on like the classic stereotypes in terms of art, you know, I wouldn't agree with the gym, or it's a scary environment, stuff like that, just being around, just lifting and that kind of testosterone fueled environment. Is there any advice that you would maybe give to just any female listening to this who wants to make that change, not even to the, I'd say extreme, it's so out of order, it's not extreme, is it? But going to the point of becoming like a bikini athlete or a powerlifter, just genuinely getting in the gym and just getting strong and lifting. Where would you maybe suggest that they start?
I would always start with just what you're comfortable with. And I think some of the easiest things to understand about a gym environment, firstly, a lot of people get worried about knowing what machines are what or where machines are. Most gyms group them. Most of the leg machines are in the same place, upper body machines are in the same place, stuff like that. Other thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask, you know, someone in the gym for guidance, for help. I get messages of people that aren't my clients being like, can you watch this video for me? Like, I don't know if this is right and stuff like that. Just don't be afraid to ask for help, and also don't be afraid of getting stronger, because I think a lot of women generally, when they see kind of a physique or a lifestyle that they want to have, they don't join the dots between getting stronger. And that's the biggest thing that I would notice in new clients that I get. They say, I want to look like this, I want to lose a bit of body fat, I want the tone up idea. And I always say, right, well, how heavy are you lifting? Oh, but I don't want to lift that heavy, you know? And it's like, don't be afraid of doing that. Like, don't be afraid of really trying. Don't be afraid of failing lifts and stuff like that, because I've failed plenty of lifts, failed plenty of, you know, PBs and stuff like that. And I would say, don't be afraid of doing that. And I think that's what sparks from, if you have a sporting background, that seems easy, because it's always learning to deal with disappointment when you come from a sporting background. When you aren't, you have to be able to understand how to deal with disappointment so that you can reap the rewards. Because some people just go in and they try to just go through the motions, you know, not want to improve, they don't really care to, but then they feel like they don't make progress. You know what I mean? It's like, don't be afraid of just trying, I would say.
I think like the most important thing as well, just in terms of like a strength perspective, is that strength doesn't necessarily mean like stature and growth.
No,
like I am literally like, I have no shame in admitting that I'm an absolute twiglet, but I've squatted and, you know, when I'm fit and lifted and things like that, I'm going into triple digits and nothing really changes. You know what I mean? Like it's obviously around specifically for track to make sure that it's powerful. To then change into
funny
speed.
Enough, that's what I say to people. People say to me, how old were you started lifting? I say about 13, 14. I said, but I don't look like it. Yeah. Because most of that time it was for athletics and we didn't grow any muscle.
Yeah, exactly, But
yeah. No, I would say so. So it's funny because I was having this conversation in the car home from the powerlifting champs this week. And one of my friend's clients said she's scared of getting bulky. And we joked and we said, well, if it happens by accident, let us know. We'll start selling your DNA and we'll make some money off it, because we're still trying to figure out how that works.
No.
So 100%.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Another question I had from someone, which I thought was quite a nice one, is that, and I think this might have been someone that follows yourself, a lot of people who I know experience eating disorders post-competition. Have you had any experience of that at all?
No, I've never had an experience of eating disorders, but I can see how it does happen. I think there's a big difference between an actual mental illness of an eating disorder and just experiencing some symptoms of your hormones being downregulated. So what they're usually referring to is when you come out of a post-show phase, you come out of the show experience, you have to gradually work your calories up. You can't just go back to normal, because your body is so sensitive that it will gain more body fat back than you lost in the first place. So you could then end up, you've just been stage lean, and then you'll be heavier than you was 4 months ago within 2 weeks. And that is a big mind fuck. You wouldn't recognize yourself. You'd feel awful. But your body is very sensitive to that. So you still have to have some control afterwards. But the biggest difficulty in that is when you down-regulate your hunger hormones during prep. It takes, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks to get back to normal. What I mean by that is, you know, just every day your body will tell you when you're hungry. It will tell you when it's full up when you're eating. When you're post-show, your body cannot tell you it's full up for a while. So you can be at great risk of just binging and eating. God, you could do 5,000-6,000 calories a day and not even bat an eyelid and be like, I can keep going. It's difficult, because once you start, it's really hard to stop. Have I had periods of overeating and doing 5,000 calories a day? Yes, of course. Has it turned into an eating disorder? Absolutely not, because as soon as your hunger hormones do regulate, you are okay. Talking to people about it is the most important as well. I said this to all of my girls that competed this year. I said, there's nothing you can do that I haven't done post-show. Do you know what I mean? Just talk to me about it, because we can make changes where possible, getting calories up and stuff like that. But it is a very difficult thing to keep that discipline around food when you haven't got a show date anymore. And you literally just have to wait for your hunger hormones to regulate again, and that is very difficult. And that's why some people then, they binge eat, they gain a lot of weight back, they then want to cut straight away. But then if you try to cut straight away, your metabolism hasn't adapted, so you won't be able to lose weight on the same amount of calories. You'd have to go lower. So then you can really get into this kind of binge restrict cycle. And I think as well, the other thing that I would say on that is that if you've ever had an experience of an eating disorder, don't compete. That's a lot of people. I know some people say it saved their eating disorder. You won't know that until you retire from it. I just wouldn't do it. It's not worth it. And then, that's the main thing. And then the other thing I would say is make sure you compete for the right reasons. I think some people compete because they really love the look. And whilst that is a really big thing, you have to understand you look like that for one day. And that's it. So you can't. I personally prefer my off-season body. I prefer when I'm heavier. I prefer when I'm curvier. I can fill out my jeans. I feel strong. I can't wait to gain weight again post-show, because I enjoy that, to live in. Some people prefer themselves stage lean, and that's where it gets a little bit difficult, because you can't push that, So I've never experienced an eating disorder, but there are, it is one of the biggest kind of assumptions that all bodybuilders, I think James Smith did a reel saying all bodybuilders have eating disorders or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't all have them, but it can be a difficult one to try and avoid as best as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's just knowing yourself. As long as you know what what your mind works with food and stuff like that. I'm a very, I credit my parents for this one, because when I was an athlete, all they would say to me is food is fuel, food is fuel. How are you going to run, at training, how you can compete well if you haven't eaten? So all through my teens, I was just told eat, don't try and get the abs, just eat because you need to perform. That's how I view food now. So when it comes to a bikini prep, I'm still viewing it as fuel, even though I'm in a deficit and getting leaner. Yeah. So any parents, I would say, tell your kids it's fuel. They need to know that.
And again, that was going to be one of my questions, but you probably beat me to it now in terms of, like, what do you think has stopped you from maybe falling down the hole of being like, I need to, because again, I don't mean to generalize in a negative way, but I think just women in general, I think, a lot of you, or it's reported a lot of the time that you're all comparing, even outside of just as a general day to day, like, oh, she looks like this, she looks like that. So what is it just, again, from that support from parents and things that have stopped you from falling down a hole of all of a sudden your appearance meaning more than what it does, like, day to day for you?
Honestly, I would say I've never really cared about how I look that deeply.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, because when I was really, really young, I was very skinny back in the day, and I would get told I was anorexic on the playground, and I'd argue it. And then when I started to grow a bit of muscle, women with muscle are unattractive, bulky. So I feel like it's always been a topic of conversation for other people, but I've never really been bothered. And I think that probably is because when I've been involved in sport, it's all about the performance. It's always about I'm just a competitive person. And whenever I would, analyze my physique in the process of competing, I don't see it as whether or not I'm attractive. I see it as whether or not I could win. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think differentiating the two is the biggest one. I could look at my physique and say, okay, I need to grow my shoulders a little bit more, or I don't need any more muscle in my quads or something like that. But I wouldn't look at it and be like, oh, if I had bigger shoulders, I'd be more attractive. I don't look at it that way. I don't know if there'd ever be a time when I quit sport completely where I'd be like, okay, now let's just build a physique I'd love to have. Because I'm like, what does that look like? I don't know what I would want to look like. I just think I'd always be training just to train, and however my body looks as a result is how it looks, I guess. So I think, that I don't know where that really stems from. I think it's just the competitiveness. And I think it's just growing up. Obviously, both my parents were athletes. They were very competitive. They just drilled in training, hard work, results, just that kind of motto constantly. That it wasn't. And I think also the other thing is that my mum was never really into as much like makeup and stuff like that. She would always be like, why are you wearing makeup? You know what I mean? So it was never a thing that I had to look a certain way. So yeah, I would say so, probably.
Just with that as well, is there? You probably answered this just based on the conversation we've had already, but is there any support from like a federation perspective, or just safeguarding within the community, or not so much? Is it you just kind of
Not really. Not really. There is one lady in the States who she's a sports psychologist, and she niches down to bodybuilding competitors, which is very interesting. She does have a podcast as well called Confessions of a Bikini Pro. So if anyone listening to this is like, I need help, listen to that. She's done a lot on the psychological side of things. I know she works one-to-one with people. I don't know if it's international or not. I guess it probably would be over Zoom and stuff. But she is someone that has taken it upon herself to take on that role, which I think is great. But aside from that, no. Unfortunately, there isn't really there's not enough money in it, I wouldn't say, to also provide that kind of support, But it also be, and again, just going from what you've mentioned in terms of how it can be just as like individuals who are competing and things like that, do you think it would be one of those like it would have been like football years ago when it's just like you need to speak to someone and they would have been like, nah, bore off, like it's not do you think that maybe just the culture of the sport would just not welcome it, or do you think... I think there's two sides to the sport. I think there is a side to the sport that is very the mental resilience, the mental toughness, just get on with it type of side. You know what you're signing up for. Do you know what I mean? That type of side. And then I think there is another side where people are a bit more empathetic. But I think that comes from the coaching. So the most well-known support systems are the coaches. They are very full on. They are very expensive, and, you know, deservedly, because of how much they do put into their clients. And I think depending on the type of person you are, that would really influence the coach that you chose, because there are coaches that are like, we want to win and that's it. And you see clients go to them, compete with them, leave, talk shit, you know. And then there's other coaches that are a lot more health focused. So I think it's more about which coach you would choose and what would be right for you. And that can change as you go through the sport and you know, need different things, I guess. So yeah, I think that's where most of the support would come from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had another question.
Go for it.
And that first one is favourite thing about the bikini community.
Ooh, favourite thing. That's a difficult one. I would just say how supportive everybody is. And I think because it's a subjective sport, everybody's a lot more supportive, because there's no I'm better than you, because you could beat me one day and I beat you another day, but we could both look the same, you know. So I think it's just a very supportive community. I've got so many amazing friends. And yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing, because it's just, there's no I'm better than you atmosphere, which is great.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And then there was a follow-up, least favourite thing about the community.
Least favourite thing. Ooh. I was going to say one that actually contradicts what I just said, which doesn't make sense. I think sometimes, you know, everyone has different methods, and I think sometimes people can be, you know, my method is the right way and that's it. I'm probably guilty of doing that as well sometimes with my clients. I know I've had conversations with them and they say, I don't understand why this coach does that. And I'm like, me neither. Like, this is the right way to do it. But I think I think sometimes, you know, you have to be open-minded to learn from other people. And I think sometimes people don't want to in that sport sometimes. It is quite, you know, my way is the right way sometimes. I would say that's, and like I say, I'm guilty of it as well probably. But I think that's probably the main thing.
Is there, I mean, we've spoken about kind of risks and things like that already, but in terms of maybe someone coming into doing this kind of thing, what do they need to kind of look for in terms of just kind of starting out? Because I know you've mentioned there's like, it's not very like, there's not, I guess, a community of, you know, going to like your own pure gym or whatever. Like, you're going to find someone such as yourself that specialises in specific in that. So what would kind of be the best option for someone to start if they were, or where to go? I
would honestly recommend what I did, and I didn't even do this on purpose. It happened by accident, but I started Googling things on YouTube, and I came across Lane Norton's YouTube and a guy called Paul Ravella, and it was a happy accident, because they are very, very intelligent people in the community, and they put out some of the best quality information on Instagram, on YouTube, and I'm glad I found them first, because there's a lot of myths that they, you know, dissolve, whatever you'd call it, myth busting, and I'm glad I found them first, because I think I got onto the right track from following what they said. So I think if some people find someone else, I don't know, I just think those two people, Lane Norton and Paul Ravella, amazing YouTubes, podcasts, etc. Anything you need to know would come from them, which I think is really helpful. Okay.
In terms of then, because I know we've probably specified more on like the bikini side of stuff to begin with. If we jump into the powerlifting side of things now, where are those kind of, would that be something that you could see longevity in just from a health perspective and doing it?
Yeah, much more so, because the preps are so much easier. Don't want to disrespect any powerlifters, but they are so much easier because the diet isn't anywhere near as extreme. And it didn't take as much out of me when I did it, which was awesome. And I would also say, just from kind of how I am as a person and how much I like the adrenaline or like the performance aspect. My dad used to always say to me when I was in athletics, he would be like, you compete better than you train, because as soon as a gun goes off and you have to win, like, you'll do it. But in training, you'll be with everyone slower than you. And I'd be like, So I'm the same with powerlifting. Like, I might fail it over and over again in training, but if I'm in competition, I'll probably do it. And I quite like that pressure. I usually kind of thrive on that, I think. So it suits me more personally as well, I think.
Yeah, crazy. And just with regards to, you mentioned their pressure, like, I think I'm the complete opposite.
Oh, yeah.
Mate, if my trainer was power 10, I'm telling you now, I'll be sick. I would be so good, but it's just competition days. Do you know what it is? It's just, I just start to think. If someone, I'll go like winter training, like, you know, hills, long reps, short recoveries, everything. Like, I live for that shit. Like, give me the pain. Yeah. And then I'll set up just 1 400. I'll just think, I'm like, I don't know why I'm thinking so much. Yeah. Because like winter, we, as you know, we put ourselves through so much pain. Yeah. And you just don't think about like explaining it to like your mates like back at school, and they're like, "What, you do that for fun?"
Yeah. Like, people like, you go running.
Yeah.
Like up hills. Yeah. Like, yes.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, but you don't get it. And they're just like, well, no, we don't. It's like, we'll give it a go. And they're like, absolutely not. And it's like, but you have to, as you said, there's something about just getting to like that second to last rep, and you're like pre-chundu, just like, it's gonna go now. Yeah. And then it happens.
It's something really pleasurable about it though. It's something like, if I'm training in the gym and I start to feel a bit sick, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Just like, do another. Yeah. Got sometimes we finished up and you're like, I could do another rep.
Yeah. No, 100%. My dad used to wind me up a lot. If I was doing like a heat and a final or something, he'd like come up to me like, you'd have to run a PB to win this. And he could be lying to me, but he knew that I'd go, oh, okay, game on. Like, okay, let's do it. So he would say those things to me all the time. Or I remember he could have easily caused dramas. There was a time when he was saying, oh, by the way, like that girl that you're against, like I heard her saying to her coach that she's got this. Your dad is the actual devil. That is so funny. But it would work. It would really rile me up. And I like, it was never bitchy between the competitors, but it would rile me up. And I'd think, did she really just say that? But imagine if I was the type to go up to her.
Do you know what? That makes so much sense, because they were just doing competition days with us. Like, it would be great. Like, we'd be chatting and stuff or whatever, or like, you know, in terms of just teams mixing. Yeah. And then you would go off and warm up, and you'd come back with like a face like after your dad
I used to take myself off. If there was another field or car park that was away from everyone to warm up, I would just walk around it, headphones in, rile myself up, and then I'm ready. I couldn't speak to people that are having fun. I'd have to take myself to that place. I'd have to get dark. 100%. No, 100%. And then I would come back on the track and I'd be like, looking like a right bitch.
And then cross the line and it's just back to Sophie again.
Yeah, and then I'd be like, oh, that was good. Let's get an ice cream. Like.
No, it's crazy. It's mental. I remember, I think that my worst one for me is when they started to really crack down with headphones at Watford. Oh, my days, man. Yeah. Just leave me alone to warm up. Do you know what I mean? Like, because obviously when they're doing the twos, we'd obviously use the 300 straight, wouldn't we?
Oh my God, it was always so busy.
And and they would be everyone like, take your headphones off. Like, oh, okay, right, no, I don't want to. It's just like, put back on. And you're fighting with the official before we even got to the line. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. No, those. Sometimes I really miss it, you know.
Do you?
I said to my dad the other day, I was like, I might just buy some spikes.
Yeah. Do you think you would now, or do you think like that because I'm still going through that transition of like, as I said to you earlier, like I'm only doing opens now and everything else. But I'll have that one block of training, and then my coach will get in my ear and be like, "You're running all right, aren't you?"
Well, that's like, exactly. Oh, yeah, and you're like, "Shut up, you know I can't compete." Like, I think that's the thing. If I haven't ran, I think that's it. I haven't ran or been on a track or been in spikes for so long. I don't know if I've still got it. Yeah. And I feel like I would if I thought I still had it. That's like competitiveness in me again. I can't just do it and come last. Yeah. Like, I would like, if I think I could do it, I'd do it. And then in my head, I'm like, am I getting a bit too old though? Yeah, start it up again.
My coach is a sicko. He always comes up to me and he's like, use examples of like Linford and stuff like that. He's like, he only took it seriously when he was like 26, 27.
I'm like, yeah, maybe. Maybe I've still got it in me then. What my dad says to me, he's like, with all this gym, you'd be stronger. Yeah. So you wouldn't get as many injuries. I'm like, oh, stop it. I don't know, you know. I feel like now I go down there every few weeks to help out with the young kids with their gym. Yeah. Sometimes I'm a bit like, I get into talking about how it will help their athletics and writing their programs, and I'm like, oh yeah, like sometimes I'm like, I wish I had that. Like when I was a teenager, because I think when we were younger, it was like, oh, you can't lift too young because you know you'll stunt your growth and stuff like that. Yeah. We just did like circuits of like crunches and planks, and that's not what the kids are doing nowadays. They are actually lifting. Got bars in their hands. And I think if I actually applied what I knew now, maybe it might accelerate some of the talent. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
No, not at all. Well, this is what happens, right? I mean, the thing is, like, I love the sport a bit, and I'll go away from it, and I'll just have one conversation with someone, I'll be like, okay, oh, fine.
Isn't it weird as well? Like when, because my dad had a girl called Jess recently. She went to the World Juniors in the 4x4 and they got third. And I was watching the race, getting a bit emotional. I was like, why am I getting a bit emotional watching it? Because it does just like, it reminds you of like, it just lights the fire a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. All I need to do is I need to listen. I'm sure it was Steve Cram with it, Super Saturday. I just need to listen to
I know the exact
that's all you need to do.
Bite,
that's all. Just listen to that. And I'm ready for anything. I'll put my head for a wall. Literally.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Like you're just like, I need to get down the track. I need to.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It's funny because my boyfriend used to do cricket as well, and he was a bowler. And when it was schools, he would then do javelin because it kind of correlates. So then my dad was like, and he can come down and do the javelin, and you can. And then my dad goes, seeing your shoulders now, you'd throw a good shot put. And I'm like, could you imagine? I come back just for shot put. Start multi-eventing. Oh, don't.
Oh,
no, we'll see.
Is there, I guess, just maybe looking at for yourself and your time that you've had through the bikini size stuff and the powerlifting things, is there any stereotypes or any consistent questions that you get given, or just frustrate you maybe, or just kind of like this isn't the case?
I think the eating disorder one's probably a big one.
Yeah.
People assume that you're unhappy doing what you're doing. I think that's probably it. People think, oh, why do you want to live like that? Yeah. You know, of like tracking your calories and never missing the gym and stuff like that. And obviously, I've just come away from a trip away for the powerlifting. I didn't track my food whilst I was there because most of it had to be Deliveroo, and I had to move my training around. So there are times where it happens. Do I come back and I'm like, oh, it's a bit annoying? Yeah, of course. It is a bit annoying to me because I think I'm a bit behind on my training plan, and I don't like to be behind on my training plan. But it's not consuming me. I'm not unhappy. Do you know what I mean? I think some people that get into the gym, because they are gym-based sports, you can get complete beginners then be like, oh, I want to start up, and they see other people at the gym doing it, and that's amazing. And then you'll get people that think, oh, like, I just go to the gym for fun, and they're over here like ruining their lives, like with how much time that they put into it. But it's interesting because when I go back to how lost I felt when I quit athletics and I didn't have that goal, I'm like, well, I was like depressed then. So it's like, I could train like you train and just live a normal life and not track my food, but that doesn't suit me. Like I just end up in a bit of a rut that I've not got anything that I'm like striving to achieve. So I think that's kind of it. People question the lifestyle a little bit, but I then question people that have no ambition. I would say that.
No, I hear it.
It's like, you know, you're doing the same thing week in, week out. You might have a great time, but to me, I'm trying to get somewhere else with it, you know, even if it's not to be the best in the world at something, even if it's just, you know, I wouldn't have the business that I have today with my coaching if I'd never competed any of it. And, you know, I wouldn't have some of the friends I wouldn't have met my boyfriend, probably not. Like all of these things that actually come about it, you know, is actually just improves the quality of your life. Yeah. So I hear it.
I think that's quite nice in terms of what you said there with regards to like people that don't have like something to do. It's almost going back to our original point when we were younger and just being like, oh, we're going to the track. Like I know there was that underlying drive and want to be like, you know, get your GB kit, represent your country at the Olympics, but at the same time it was something you were doing. And I've always explained it as I was going somewhere, I just didn't have a destination where I was going. It was just something, and don't know what it is.
Yeah, I have no idea what the end goal is, but I know along the way I'm picking up more and more things.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what it is. Like I never got anywhere with athletics, but I wouldn't have the discipline and drive that I do now if I didn't do athletics. You know what I mean? There's so many things that come about it. 100%.
How does, just out of interest as well, because I guess from a track and field perspective, when you pick up an injury, whether it's torn hamstring or whatever, it's just a pain in the arse and it's shit. Because like that whole kind of winter is just, you look at, especially when it happens when you're just coming out of like winter training and it's something big and you're like, you're usually coming off a really good winter, so you're like, what could it have been? And then that whole kind of year, unless it clears up quite quickly, you're always wondering what if kind of thing. But I imagine, and if I'm wrong, then let me know if it's the same, but that must be magnified by like 1 million if you pick up an injury during bikini prep, surely, because how do you obviously make sure that you don't then put the weight on, rehab correctly, but need to be lifting?
I think the thing with the bikini is that I think there's always a route around it, which is very different to the athletics. Like when I tore my hamstring, that was it. Like you weren't running for however many weeks, you know. At the start of this prep, I picked up a bit of a shoulder injury that was flaring up a lot when I bench pressed and nothing else. So I just took out bench press and I was like, I'll deal with it later. Because there's so many variations of movements. And I think one of the biggest things that I'd learned through the lifting weights in general is just how to actually target different muscle groups, the movement planes, all of those sorts of things, the biomechanics behind it. If you can't do one movement, there's probably another one that you can do. So I did pick up a bit of a shoulder injury. I have a sports therapist I go and see regularly anyway, just to keep me in check. Because it's more the stress of overloading that would cause the injuries rather than any necessarily. There's sometimes people have tears, but usually it's when they're just trying to lift too heavy and they're being silly. Whereas I was like, that is 100% going to tear if I try and go too heavy. So yeah, there's usually a route around it. So although it was frustrating at the time, because at the time, I needed bigger shoulders for this year, and I thought, but I have a shoulder injury, so I can't train as hard as I want to. Did it affect the outcome? Maybe 2%, but it's not a case of whether you compete or not. Do you know what I mean? Like it would be with track. So yeah, it's a bit more lenient. There's usually routes around it rather than you're done for the year, if that makes sense.
So that wouldn't, because again, I'm looking at that from just such a probably ignorant and uneducated perspective, but in terms of that wouldn't, like, for you, that wouldn't just ruin, like...
No, it would the powerlifting though. Like if you obviously saw something with the powerlifting, then you can't just not do the deadlift. I mean, you can do bench only and deadlift only. So if you had an issue somewhere, you could make it work by doing just another lift as a single lift competition. But you probably wouldn't. You'd probably just rehab and try again, basically. Luckily, that's not happened though. But that would be more of a risk of anything tearing. So we'll see. I'll let you know how it goes next year.
No, it's just, I just think it's so interesting, Sophie, to be fair, because it's just like, going back to the point of that, for me, when looking up and just around the sport, I didn't want to do too much, because the thing with this pod is that I just like to have it free flowing, because I feel like coming with some questions is great, but then I don't want to box it into anywhere. But what's quite nice, and the reason why obviously I wanted you to come on, is that your experience has always just looks like, from just seeing you kind of grow over the years with doing this, is it's always been positive, whereas from like a generalized perspective, particularly the bikini side of stuff, it always, I don't know, from maybe a media perspective, it seems really negative. But at the same time, I'm probably not looking at bikini specific media, I'm just looking at generalized, looking into it as a whole.
I think I get off a bit scot-free that there's not as much drug use in bikini, because that's usually the biggest assumptions to things and the negative that surrounds it. And I also think, as a bit of a disclaimer, I think my sporting background put me in a position to handle it a lot better. In terms of, I've never been overweight because I've always been into sports. So then for me to get lean, it's a little bit easier than if you took someone off the street that had never done a sport before. So I think as much as I try to show the positives, I do sometimes think, am I like masking over some of the negatives like in my content? Am I not showing it? But then actually I think it's just that I don't experience them as much because of the route that I went to get there. I do still talk about it on my YouTube a little bit, with how difficult some things can be and when the tiredness is low. But then I always then just say to myself, but this is your choice. Like, you've got to have some resilience to do it. So just the same as you do any sport, and that's how I was brought up through sports. So to me, it's like, if I was really dwelling on the negatives that are put out there in the media, why would I do it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, if it was really something that really got to me and I had to talk about all the time and I had to show in my content, there's so many other girls that do. They talk about their binge eating post-show, and then you'll see them next year in a competition and you're like, but I thought it was really bad. Like, do you know what I mean? So I try and take that stance of it. I like to show the positives that's realistic for me. I can't speak for other people's experiences, but for me, I think mine is definitely easier because of my previous sporting background.
Do you think that with that as well, as on top of the sporting background, it almost sounds as if that you're happy to take onus on things as well? Like, which... don't mean to kind of attack anyone, so if you feel like I am, then maybe you just need to look at yourself in the mirror a little bit. But I almost feel as if, like, a lot of, again, it's just maybe looking at from someone that isn't experienced in both us, the track and field, but specifically yours, is that they'll say that the sport itself is the evil.
Oh my God, yes. That's the nail on the head with bodybuilding. Yeah. People say, oh, my bodybuilding like gave me an eating disorder or something like that. The eating disorder is the biggest one, or the bodybuilding kind of affected how I look at my body. But if you really talk to somebody about the reasons why they got into it and why they wanted to prep and how they liked the look and stuff like that, and it's like, but that was your decision. I think the eating disorders one is a little bit more complex, because obviously mental illness is a lot more complex, and I wouldn't ever say that someone's, you know, mental illness
decided to,
like it wasn't, you know, it was a driving force, or it's not important, because it absolutely is. And if that's what you've suffered with, then I hope that, you know, it obviously improves for you. But I think you can't say that a sport gave you a mental illness. I think that's a little bit strong. And I think I struggle with that, because I think surely somewhere along the way you would have seen a red flag. Someone might have said something. You know, did you do enough research on the coach you were with, or had you had previous issues? I just think there must have been something along the way before it got to that point and again, I can only speak from my experience, because I can only speak from how I felt post shows, and how I know there's times where it's been difficult, but I've still it's not got to that point. Do you know what I mean? But then I don't know everyone's reasons for getting into it, or the experience they've had for getting into it. But I agree with what you're saying. At some point, the sport is always going to be there. The sport is always going to be the sport, and there's always going to be requirements of being a competitor at a top level. If you don't like it, don't do it. Basically, no one's holding a gun to your head. You know what I mean? And I think as long as you have your wits about you, you have people in your corner, and you know what you're doing, then the chances of you having really adverse health effects mentally or physically is obviously going to be lesser. You know. I
mean, even just from like track and field side of stuff, like some of the kids that that grew up around, and there was a few, you know, I won't mention any names because I don't want to kind of put anyone on blast or anything like that. But again, like, I've got no shame in saying it. Like, there were some competitions where I'd go and just perform shit, and that'd be it. My spikes were out the front door, or my kit was on the floor. I was like, fuck this shit, I can't be asked to do it. And then it's just like, you know, it was upsetting, and it's just like, but luckily, I guess it's the individuals I had around me to say, like, first, like, grow the fuck up. It's just a time. Like, get over it.
Yeah, and I also think there was a huge sense of sportsmanship that we would really, like, carry yourself properly around your competitors, around your team, around the officials. There was always this respect I feel like we had to uphold. And I sometimes feel like with social media now, because when we were teenagers, social media was Instagram was starting, but it wasn't how it was now. And I sometimes feel like bodybuilding definitely has a pedestal on social media, because the algorithm likes it, because you see these freaky physiques, it gets straight up your explore page, and there's a lot of opinions on it. And I do think it's given people the platform to voice their opinions, but I ultimately think that these federations do a lot for people. They put on these shows the same way athletics has, and I do think there should be some respect for the sport that you have chosen to take part in, you know. And I think that was drilled into us a lot when we were younger, of how you carried yourself around the track. It was like, don't show weakness to your competitors, don't do it, just hold it in, deal with it when you get home, have a cry, go to bed, wake up, go back to training. Like, that was it, you know. And I thought that was great. That's how I still approach my training now and my shows now, to be honest with you. I wouldn't be taken to social media and saying anything. So.
No, for sure. Yeah, no, definitely. But as you say, it's just one of those where, like, I don't know, just this resilience that was instilled in you from track and field, like, that, you know, you could have an absolute shitter, be crying on the coach home, and then the next morning, like, one of your teammates be like, "You're training tonight," like, "Yeah, right." It's just forgotten now. It's like, come on,
and it's just straight back to it.
Start again.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. No, I think just what. There was another question that was sent to me, and this is just a filler question while I kind of have a think about.
Go for it.
Do you have a dog?
No.
No?
No dog, unfortunately.
Simply, easily answered. No, brilliant. Where does, I know we've touched on it already in terms of you looking at kind of what is the long-term physical difficulties potentially going to be if we stuck to it. What would you say then with regards to people that, again, maybe are 50-50 in, or thinking there's something going on here that isn't right anymore, and getting to that point of maybe I need to chill out and sit back and relax? What are those things that if one of your girls came up to you and said, "So if I'm been experiencing this the last maybe 2-3 competitions," what would those things be looking at?
One of the biggest ones for females is losing their menstrual cycle around their show. That is the biggest one. And that, you know, this is the difficulty when you can spiral into doing whatever it takes and stuff like that. For me personally, if I'd only experienced that loosely, like missing 1 or 2, but I've not had an official kind of, I've lost my cycle, you know. That is a big one. And I think some people will start a prep without getting it back. And I don't agree with that. And I think you should have enough understanding of knowing how to try and get it back to some extent of obviously increasing your food, dropping your expenditure. If it doesn't come back within a couple of months, you have to go and see a doctor. You need to do your blood test. You need to see where your hormones are at, because that is the biggest thing. I know people that have lost their cycle for a couple of years and it hasn't come back and they haven't put in the effort to get it back. And that to me that's important. That's really important. Luckily for my girls, I think only one of them they missed 1 period, I think, and then it was straight back. But that, to me as a coach, I'm like, every check-in, I'm like, I need to check. Like, I track all of my, even if you're not a competitor, I track all my girls' cycles, because I need to know what's going on, because I'm obviously giving you food, like requirements as in calories and training and stuff like that. So if something's not going up right, that's your biggest, most obvious one. The other thing would just be like constant tiredness. Your hunger's very up and down. You don't know when you're full up. You don't know when you're hungry. Those are the ones that are big. And if they don't settle within a couple of months post-show, then you might want to get a blood test done as well. So some people actually are very on it right now with doing blood tests when they first start a prep. If something's off, they'll delay it, which is great. Yeah. Some people do the blood test after the prep, see where they're at. Some people do it halfway through the off season. To be honest, for most people, it's probably a good thing to do. Even when you're young, you think you're completely resilient to any adverse health issues, don't you? Until something hits you. Yeah. So I think even if you are in your 20s, 30s and you're into sport and you are kind of, training hard and stuff, it's still good knowledge to have. I've never actually done the blood test, having said that, but that's because any effects seem to disappear pretty quickly. I probably should, just to double check. But those are the obvious ones. Yeah, those are the ones where it's like, okay, we need this to be in check before we do anything else.
When you became aware to those kind of effects early on, if you don't mind me asking, how? Because I imagine someone listening to this that, again, might be just prompted to want to kind of get into this and lifting and things like that. How do you get, I guess, the word comfortable with that? Because for my own job, like I will have, without failure, 3 people in the space of a week who are imminently about to end their life or harm themselves, and they'll tell me over the phone, obviously, get things in place like that. But there's obviously that point for me now, because I've been doing it for a number of years. I'm numb to it. Yeah. Like there are people that are saying it and I'm like, oh, you'll be all right, fuck off, like it'll be sound, we'll start working with you in a bit. And then there'll be others that are like, right, yeah, you're going to. But again, even after that 30 minutes I've had that phone call, I've got to speak to someone else.
Yeah.
And then hearing you mention that about the menstrual cycle and stuff like that must be quite daunting, or was it daunting for you, if you don't mind me asking, the beginning of this kind of stage and being informed of that kind of thing? Was it a worry?
I think when I first started, because I started about 5-6 years ago now, there wasn't as much information on social media, on YouTube and stuff like that. It wasn't as well known. And my first prep, I never experienced any issues. Second prep, never experienced any issues. Third prep, I experienced I missed 1 period, which was meant to come show weekend, but that was because that was a really, really hard prep. And I was like, I could have done that better, and that's why it happened. So to me, I kind of took ownership of it and was just like, I know that I made some mistakes, and that's why it happened. So it didn't worry me, because then I know I could rectify it. And I knew it'd be fine. I think the difficulty that I think people should be aware of is that if you are on birth control, you don't ovulate anyway, and you don't have a cycle anyway. So you might have a bleed, but it's not actually a cycle. And so you don't want to just go blindly into a prep on birth control and then never know. That's the hard part, because you'll never know if you lose it. I did it on birth control this time around because I knew previously that if I don't make mistakes, it's fine. So I went in with that knowledge and that information, which I was comfortable with personally. So I think it's a personal choice. If you've ever experienced loss of period or any issues like that from anything, potentially, be very careful, do your blood tests. And then I think it's I think set some boundaries as well, because I think for me, I did set the boundary that if I lost my period however many weeks out from a show, and I had to go that long without one, then that would be, no. Whereas because the show that I did, I didn't know I'd lost it until it didn't happen that weekend. And it's like, well, I'm about to step on stage. Do I just not do it? Well, it's tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So at that point, I was happy with that. But I think it's setting some boundaries. What are you going to be comfortable with? What are you going to be happy with? So yeah, that's how I would play it. And I think, and also there are some competitors that start a diet and they lose it straight away. And there are people that never lose it. So it's very, very person dependent. But I think that's a conversation you want to have with yourself, your coach, and if you get blood tests done, that you can be the most informed on stuff like that, if that makes sense. So for me, it wasn't a personal worry because I'd had the preps without concern. But yeah.
Yeah. So like, it's like, I guess just maybe just coming to finish up now then, like anything in life, particularly this, outside of kind of just trusting a coach wholeheartedly, definitely do your own research.
100%, 100%. And I actually think I don't know anybody else that competes without a coach, which might make me sound really big-headed with what I'm about to say, but I think because I did my own research, it puts me off getting a coach, if I'm honest. And that's not to say that other people don't know what they're doing, but I just think no one knows you better than you do. No one's going to understand your values better than you do. And if you're paying someone to listen to them and, you know, they are doing things that are questionable, you're more likely just to do it. Do you know what I mean? And that, again, it might sound controversial because I am a coach as well and I want all of my clients to listen to me. But I think you should be able to do some research yourself and just make sure you're happy. That's why I love when all of my clients ask me questions. And that's why whenever I tell a client to do something, I always tell them why and like what is the reason for that, because I would never want someone to just blindly follow with no kind of understanding. Because then, you know, they might finish with me and then not think, actually, I was meant to do X, Y, and Z in a different phase, but they would never have known that. And they just then continue thinking that's how they have to live their life, you know? And I just think, the more understanding you have, the better, for sure.
How long did you, again, just putting a number on it, because I know some people will probably question and ask, but how long do you reckon your research phase was before you were like, let's go kind of thing? How
So from the second I got told I should do it to the second I stepped on stage was about 2 years. And I would say the first initial 3 to 6 months I started thinking about it, following a couple of people on social media. But I would say from about a year before was when I was obsessed with watching YouTube videos and podcasts, and I would come home from uni and just spend hours, like hours, like you wouldn't believe. So that would probably be from a year before. Cool. So quite a while, I would say. It's not an impulsive decision at all. 100%. Not and having said that, each prep I do isn't an impulsive decision either. Even though I've been doing it for 5 years, for me, like I said, I'm going back to powerlifting next year. If you said to me you're going to compete in 2024, I don't know. Like it would be an impulsive decision for me to say that right now. Like I couldn't tell you until I got closer and made that decision, just because each prep is hard on the body. So
cool. Any closing statements from yourself? Because I come here, I just sit people in front of me and I ask them to talk, but that it's obviously selfishly coming from what I want to know. So just with kind of having this opportunity to kind of talk about what you do like this, is there any other kind of small snippets of golden information that you
I would say, because obviously where I do coach a lot of women, bikini, strength training, changing their physique, etc., I always end up coming across the main theme of people being scared to fail at things. And I think that is one of the things I've been very lucky enough to not fear too much. We all have a little bit of it in us. We always are going to fear failure a little bit. But I see time and time again people not achieve the goal they want to achieve because they're scared of trying something.
Didn't start at all.
Yeah, they're scared of starting. They're scared of trying something. They'll do just enough to be comfortable. And you can, you visually see it in someone. Like you visually see, oh, if only they did this, or if only they just went for it. And I just think that's something I see very common. And that's something I try really hard to instill in all of my clients. And I try to, and I just think I'm lucky because I've grown up doing sport, but I wish other people, if they didn't grow up with sport, that they do find that kind of resilience later on in life.
But sure. it's more beauty of the struggle in it rather than the actual outcome. Like every time, like, you know, when we've going back to like talking about Super Saturday, like Greg, Jess and Mo, the thing they spoke about wasn't just cross the line, it was like everything was worth it. that it always goes back to just that 4-year period block.
Every single day that you didn't want to do it.
Rather than the actual, I've got the gold, cheers, thanks, but all of this was worth it now.
100%. Like every single day you didn't want to do it and you did it anyway.
Yeah.
All those parties you miss.
Yeah.
All the things you say no to, all the things you say yes to, it all adds up. For sure.
Because again, I think even now, just finishing up, just with regards to, I've never made it in terms of like an international vest, anything like that. But I don't look back on wishing, I wish I went to that party ever.
Yeah, no.
Because I'm like, actually, that weekend I had, having thankfully I met someone like yourself, Josh, everyone, your brother, all of that, Cameron, everyone, and just the summers were just hilarious. Do you know what I mean? It was just
the
worth
memories
it.
are something else, 100%.
Yeah.
There's always a little bit of a what if, but you'd never take it away.
But the thing is, the what if is because of things, for me personally, because I think in terms of like from an injury perspective as well, I didn't ask myself to just tear up my groin and everything else. It was just, it happened. And I was like, it will never be a what if because I decided not to go back. It will just be a what if because body just went.
But don't you just think as well, the time you put into the rehab, even when things were going, like, think about all of the times when it was going bad. Like, I know for me, when I tore my hamstring, then had a stress fracture, that was back to back, like 6 months apart. So that was about 3 years total of nothing. So if I look back and I think I still stuck at something for 3 years when every day sucked. Like every day sucked. I never got what I wanted. So if I just have one bad day, like what's that?
Because the thing is, because at least then you can say, at least I wasn't a knobhead that I dropped out. And I tried. Do you know what I mean? And then that's it.
And it's just that whole, like, you don't fail unless you quit. Like, that's what my dad used to always say to me. He'd like, you're only letting yourself down if you give up. So.
No,
100%.
No, thank you so much for this conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great. Appreciate it very, very much. And look forward to seeing how you keep getting on with things.
Thank you, and you.
Cheers.